Question number 1. I'm confused about both of Paul's letters to the Thessalonians. My understanding is in his first letter, he said we will be caught up in the air. Some people call it rapture. Then in Paul's second letter is where my confusion comes from. Does he say that we will not be in this rapture? It sounds like that to me, and I know many don't like to mention that chapter, and I don't know why. I really need help with this. Name withheld. First of all, they don't like to mention 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 because it absolutely destroys their so-called rapture theory. The word rapture appears nowhere in the Bible, and since neither Christ or the apostles spoke in those terms, why would we? There is no rapture, only the gathering to the true Christ at the seventh trumpet, which doesn't happen until after Satan appears as the Antichrist at the sixth trumpet. When we pick up the subject of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 13 and read it all the way to the end of the chapter, with understanding, we end up learning that Jesus, when he returns at the seventh trumpet, will bring many of the Christians that have died throughout the centuries back with him to serve as his ministers during the 1,000 years, those called the Zadok in Ezekiel 44, including the prophets and the apostles, who God used to bring forth his word when they lived in the flesh. The rest of the dead in Christ, in my own personal opinion, will remain in heaven until after the 1,000 years are finished and the great white throne judgment occurs. Jesus only returns once at the seventh trumpet, which is when the day of the Lord begins, the 1,000 years. It's at the seventh trumpet that all are changed into spiritual bodies, and those of the 7,000 Zadok which are alive and remain at that time will be gathered in the clouds, which means clouds of people, to meet the Lord in the air, which means in their spiritual bodies. The Zadok are not the only ones that will take part in the first resurrection, but they're the only ones allowed to approach Christ during the 1,000 years, as you can see in Ezekiel chapter 44. Being with Jesus is the very subject of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verses 13 through 18, not the first resurrection, even though both the first resurrection and the gathering of the Zadok to Christ happen at the same moment in time. In 1 Thessalonians 4:17, where it says, "Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them," that's when the Zadok are all gathered together to Christ at the seventh trumpet in the clouds, the same figure of speech used in Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1, where it says a cloud of witnesses, to meet the Lord in the air, and that word air is number 109 in your Greek dictionary of the Strong's Concordance, and it means to breathe unconsciously. Remember, after God formed Adam in Genesis chapter 2 verse 7, he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, meaning God placed Adam's spiritual body into his flesh body at that time. We have two bodies, a flesh, terrestrial body, and a spiritual, celestial body, as you'll find explained in detail in 1 Corinthians 15. And so shall we, the Zadok of which Paul is part of, ever be with the Lord. But after the 1,000 years are finished, the we becomes all who are alive and remain, as in all who were not blotted out in the lake of fire and took part in either the first or the second resurrection. Even the 144,000 are not allowed to approach Christ until after the 1,000 years are finished, even though they'll be gathered to Jerusalem and the surrounding area thereof, along with all who take part in the first resurrection, who along with those Christ brings with him at the seventh trumpet are the good figs written of in Jeremiah 24. This is why Christ says, "Now learn a parable of the fig tree" in Mark 13:28, right after explaining that upon his return his elect will be gathered from the utmost part of the earth to the utmost part of heaven in Mark 13:27. And so shall we at the seventh trumpet, Paul being one of the Zadok Christ brings with him, ever be with the Lord. That's why it says we there. Paul was including himself. And after the 1,000 years are finished, so shall we all ever be with the Lord, meaning all who are in Christ Jesus, because at that point the only ones left are those who are part of the many-membered body of the true Christ. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. And to go into further detail on this subject, watch the video entitled Crash Course on the First Resurrection. And if you have a biblical question, you can write us at Mark13Records@mail.com.